name's Uzair Hyog, and I'm a clinical strength and conditioning specialist and also musculoskeletal physiotherapist in the UK. This video is brought to you in association with Rehab Guru. So this video is essentially an extension on my previous video where I talked about some of the key essentially force patterns that you can use in both middle and also late stage of rehabilitation when it comes to selecting exercises. So the key thing that I wish for you to take away is really to have a better understanding and also appreciation of how to prescribe different exercises in that middle to late stage of rehabilitation. And the reason why it's going to be important for you and what you're going to get from it is by the end of it, hopefully, you should feel a little bit more confident, okay, to be able to prescribe exercise, okay, for your patients, both upper limb and also lower limb. So what I'm going to run through is I'm going to run through some key concepts and some key ideas that you can use to add additional variety to the key force patterns that I spoke about previously. And just to recap, the key force patterns were exercises that involve essentially rapid extension, exercises that were knee dominant, exercises that were hip dominant, and then the pulling exercises for the upper limb and also the pushing exercises for the upper limb that could either be both horizontal or vertical derivatives. So the first concept to think about is the point of application, the point of application of where that load resides. So if we take, for example, okay, a split squat or a lunge, okay, and we have a patient or an athlete holding on to two dumbbells, the point of application, essentially, really what that attests to is where that load lies in regards to the key axis of rotation. So this is all about leverage. Now, broadly speaking, the key thing to think about here is the closer we have that load essentially to our base of support, the more stable, okay, your patient is likely to be. That means that actually, okay, the more stable they are, the more force they can generate into the ground. So if we're talking about being able to generate large amounts of force, then we want to try and keep that load and the point of application of that load as close to the base of support as possible. The further away from the base of support, essentially the more unstable, okay, and the more difficult we make it for that patient. Now, two things come off the back of that. We may want to prescribe something that is relatively unstable because we're interested in improving motor learning or something similar to that. Equally so, we may actually wish to not actually make that patient's essentially movement pattern unstable, and we might want it to be very stable because we're very much interested in force production. So the next thing to consider is range of motion. Okay, so in terms of range of motion, so often, okay, when we are prescribing exercise, we tend to want the patient to work through the fullest range of motion as possible. Now, broadly speaking, that is a good thing. So, for example, if someone is doing a back squat, you prescribe a back squat, you want them to go through a full range of motion, often down to about 90 degrees of knee flexion and then all the way up into full extension. And that's absolutely fine. However, as our patient gets closer towards, okay, their end goal, whatever that may be, so they're coming to the end of their rehabilitation, so they're more towards the late stage, actually there may be a justification actually for you to reduce that range of motion because that range of motion is much closer, okay, to where that patient or that athlete needs, okay, to generate high forces. So it may be that actually, rather than doing a full squat all the way down, it may be that actually you're working through a limited range of motion, okay, into squats, a much limited range of motion, because that's actually where they're going to need to generate those large forces. And that's absolutely okay. So range of motion can be something that we can manipulate, okay, in terms of an exercise variable within these patterns. Base of support is an obvious one because, again, if someone is on one leg, then that creates much more of a stability, okay, challenge than it does on two legs. Generally speaking, on two legs, you can generate much more force, okay? So base of support can definitely be something that we can utilize. but also direction. Direction can also be really, really helpful. Okay, and what I mean by that is often most of the exercises we do are often in one plane. So it will be in the sagittal plane or it will be in the frontal plane. But actually, in terms of direction, okay, to add some specificity, okay, it may be okay to do something with a directional component to it. Okay, because it adds specificity, okay, to our patient program. Now, clearly, during the initial stages of their rehabilitation, we're not necessarily going to need that level of specificity. Okay, so being uniplanar, okay, or working in one plane is probably going to be all that's required. But actually, as we become more specific and as we move closer towards their end goals, then there is nothing that would stop you actually from being a bit more creative and thinking about what is it they actually need to do. Yeah, and based upon what they need to do, okay, you can be really creative as long as it meets some key criteria. Okay, so it meets the force profile, okay, of that athlete's particular sport or their activity or their occupation, okay, as well as looking similar, so having very similar kinematics, okay, and maybe a similar metabolic profile. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that and thank you very much for listening. Clearly, okay, you're more than welcome to subscribe to our website and to follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd like to know more about strength and conditioning, okay, as it pertains to the clinical side of things, then of course, okay, you can check out our online course, Integrated Clinical Strength and Conditioning, Only the Fundamentals. Okay, thanks for listening and speak to you soon.